Good morning, how are you today? And welcome from beautiful Brisbane, Australia. My name's Linda and I'm your trauma recovery coach. This morning, welcome. I'm sorry I'm late this morning. I've been dealing with infected sinuses, so it's made the mornings challenging. So I do apologise from my heart that I'm late. I want to talk to you about disorganised attachment. And first of all, I'll grab the infographic for us. The infographic will be up down below after we've finished as well. Okay. Now, disorganised attachment, and my head is completely disorganised with the infected sinuses this morning, as you can see. Okay, now attachment theory forms an important part of understanding what's going on internally for us, and quite often with good morning, I'm sorry I'm late, just dealing with infected sinuses at the moment. So it's been a bit of an interesting morning. I hope you're all doing well, and thanks for joining in, and it's great to have you with me even though I'm late. So attachment theory is by John Bowlby, so Bowlby, and if you want to look into the different forms of attachment, we can do that as well. But today I want to talk about disorganised attachment, because with complex PTSD, it's what we can experience, okay? It's the most common form of attachment with PTSD, okay? Complex PTSD. And what I want to do today is something a bit different. I want to look at the signs of disorganised attachment, but I also want to be able to, after we've gone through the signs of it, is to give us a set of questions, and I'll put that they're both in infographics today. And what I'll do is put the infographics down below so that you can print them off and journal through what resonates with you at this time. Now, sometimes when we go through, signs, or we're reading up on symptoms, and we can go, yes, that's me. No, that's not me. Yes, that's me. Oh, definitely not. Or definitely yes. What we need to be able to do is have a list of questions once we go, oh yeah, I can identify with that at the moment. We also need a list of questions that we can reflect what's happening for us internally. Because one of the things that happens with complex PTSD is that we have an external world, okay? So we have the world all around us. Hi, Justine. And we have our internal world that we tend not to share with anyone, okay? And predominantly because the world inside of us is disorganized, okay? And that's got to do with the fact that in our brain, we spend a lot of time on hyper-arousal, so therefore our biology and our neurology is working against us to get organised, because when we're living in hyper-arousal especially, and I speak about hypo-arousal more because I resonate with that, when we're living with complex PTSD, our body is so often immersed in the trauma anyhow, that for us to be able to begin to get organised, we need access to our prefrontal cortex. And most of the time for us with complex PTSD, we've lived in and from the limbic system, okay? And we don't have access when we're in hyperarousal or hypoarousal to our prefrontal cortex, which is where we to order. Now, in order to get back into our order, we need to do things like this, okay? We need to look at what sign we're working with at the moment, and then we need to have the question to reflect internally so that we regain a secure attachment within ourselves, okay? So this is basically the first part, is as a consequence of trauma, we do live in constant alert and constant signs for immediate danger. So it is when we're living in hyper-vigilance or hypo-vigilance. Hi, Monique. Great to have you join in. And then, because we're living in constant hyper-vigilance or hypo-vigilance, and I will put that infographic down below again about hypo and hyper-vigilance so that you can go through the steps of where we become dysregulated. We are exhausted, okay? And it's not because of anything that we have done or anything we do. It's just that living out of our limbic system, we become exhausted. Everything biologically and chemistry unattaches, and we're living in fight, flight, freeze or fawn, and we do not have access to our prefrontal cortex where order takes place, okay? So there's that part, and that's a very important part. And this is why if you do therapy, you don't need to go back over the past. If you see a new therapist or a trauma coach, you do need to outline what's happened. So we either do a genetic history or a family tree or timeline as to what's happened for you. But it's not about going in and digging out the deep emotional stuff, because you're living in it, immersed as it is. So you don't want to go back over it. That's why you need to be working with a trauma-informed therapist, okay, or a trauma recovery coach, because they understand that you're already living in it. You don't need to go back over it. We want to work with today. Okay, so another sign of disorganized attachment is irrational behavior that sometimes can't be explained. Now, I was going to go to my kids and say, remember when you used to say to me, Mum, you don't do that? And I'd go, well, why not? And get you some real life examples of the things that I used to do. But I forgot. But I can guarantee there are things that I used to do that my kids used to say to me, Mum, you don't say that. And more often than not, it wasn't about things that I do behaviour-wise, but I definitely used to say things that were completely irrational and didn't make sense, certainly to them. And this is predominantly when they're older teenagers as well. They're like, Mum, no, Mum, you don't do that. No. And I actually, things that normal mums do, I never did either, by the way. So irrational would be, one time, this is actually when my daughter was in, what do they call it here, grade 6. Her music teacher was really, really rude to her in front of the entire class. And this is back when I was becoming very unwell, so I couldn't go up to the school. So I literally wrote the teacher an A4 page on behaviour and, we'll just leave it at that, on behaviour. I was very kind, but I wrote that you just don't, this is not how you treat a child, you know? And, but apparently normal parents don't do things like this. So maybe if I didn't have some sign of disorganised attachment, I mightn't have written the music teacher an A4 page on, how to go about, and this is about how to treat children healthy emotionally. Whatever she said to my daughter at the time was really, really devastating for her, and she came away severely upset. But anyhow, that's the sort of thing that can happen. And so irrational behaviour isn't just things that, are going to get you locked away. I mean, let's face it, we don't do things like that. But we will find ourselves doing things that other people don't do. And you know what? Big picture, let me tell you, it's not always a bad thing. I mean, yes, it's a sign of disorganised attachment, and that socially, okay, because the social part of our brain isn't always online either, by the way. Socially, we may seem to do things that are irrational, but the big picture is we're the people that end up taking risks and being leaders, okay? Now, you may not feel like that at the moment, and that's okay. Trust me, that's okay. But if we don't step up and call people out on their behaviour, especially for our children, then we're agreeing that it's okay to treat them that way. And yeah, that won't ever go down on my watch. But let's keep going. Another sign that we have a disorganised attachment. We hold on to a view that we're not worthy, okay? We're not worthy of anyone to care about us. We feel undeserving. We feel like I have no value. And can I just say that there was a time when I absolutely ticked every one of those boxes, and not just because of disorganised attachment, but because coming through complex childhood trauma or brain develop, our ACEs, right, adverse childhood experiences, we've never had it modelled. Okay, we have never had it modelled to us. What is it like to feel worthy? What are the ingredients of feeling valued? Okay, what's it feel like to feel that I deserve that someone should care for me equally? And if you're anything like me in the relationship department, you'll know what it's like that you pick people who literally reinforce that I'm undeserving, that I have no value, and they don't care. Okay? And we've got to be willing to deal with this stuff in order that, especially from my side of the screen, that we don't ever choose this type of relationships again. I mean, the last one nearly killed me because I didn't understand any of this. Okay? So, hi Christine, I won't be going down that road again. And it's good, I won't. Okay, so we have an absence of trust in authority and in other adults. And sometimes it's because we can sit back and see there's a better way to do it, but with our internal system offline, we don't know how to say that, so we're not going to say anything, right? And of course we have an absence of trust after everything that was done to us. I mean, my goodness, it completely overwhelmed our entire sensory system. Our sensory system becomes blunted. So why am I going to trust what's happening around with other adults in the world if I've had to blunt my sensory system? So at the moment, I'm not trusting what's happening within me. Okay? Sometimes I get challenged reading all these signs and lots of other material because, and also if you do it too, I want you to be very careful because sometimes it could come across as it's all your fault. And it's not our fault, okay? Our brains develop completely the opposite to somebody who's never experienced trauma. And when it's driven from what's happening in our brain, then we can change that and we can change what's happening within us as well. When we understand what it is we need to do, it becomes easier to see what's happening internally and externally for us. Okay? Now, I was really challenged by this next one, a lack of empathy towards other adults. I really had to sit back and think, oh my goodness, I really feel... Sorry about that. I just came up with a sign. I really feel like I feel for other people, and how can you say I've got a lack of empathy? And then I realised what it is for us is that we can't show it. We feel it inside of us when other people hurt, but we don't know how to bring it from the internal to the external. And there's a very big difference in understanding that, okay? Because once we understand that, we can practice the practice of having empathy, okay? So, again, it comes back to how our brain developed, what we did and didn't see in our world around us as children, but it also means that as an adult, I can begin to understand what empathy is, and even though I'm feeling it, as I understand it and I put language around it, then I'm able to go, okay, all I need to do now is express it. Okay, so part of disorganized attachment is we do find it really hard to be in relationships with other people, because remember, our primary trigger or response to life, right down in our primal brain, is fear. So if anything comes along in your day-to-day life and your first response is fear-based, then everything in the brain follows after that. Whereas when something comes along for somebody who's never experienced trauma, their first response is, oh, that's manageable. Can you imagine if what we did every day, our first response was, that's manageable, instead of our brain going, oh, something's happening, fear, trigger, whole limbic system, everything goes offline, and then how are we supposed to manage it? Okay? So we have to be able to go, right, this is what's happening, to identify the moment that's happened, in order that we can begin retraining our brain to, oh, that's manageable. Now, this happened to me yesterday, I think. An issue came up where I got a letter saying, oh, you owe this money, blah, 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 blah. Now, once upon a time, just getting that letter, I can tell you the fear-based response would have had me in a full-blown anxiety attack and crumbling under the table and going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Okay? But because I know this information now, I went, oh, okay, this is manageable. Let's look through what I can do. Do you know, that is the first time in my life that I've gone, okay, this is manageable. Let's deal with this. Okay? I dealt with it. It was done. I got up after it. Well, got up as in I left my computer afterwards and I went, too easy. Can you imagine what our lives would have been like if we had that one bit of information that our brain has a fear-based response which triggers our neurology, our biology, separates us from our prefrontal cortex, so we have no order. And then now to know that if I can choose to say, right, this is manageable and work through it, I can create new neural pathways and my brain's first response won't be fear. Actually, Christine just brings up a really good point that, so my empathy has just been codependency behaviour. Yes. Yes. In a nutshell, yes. We're too nice. But what it is, okay, this is how we can look at it with complex PTSD. In this situation, Christine, the empathy has just been a codependency behaviour. So if we remember that with codependency, we go from one extreme to the other. I love how Pia Melody, who is a pioneer in codependency, explained it. She'd go around and turn lights on in the house, and she'd either turn on too many or she'd sit in the dark. All right? And her husband finally pointed out to her and taught her how to just turn on a balanced amount. All right? So with codependency and empathy, what we do is we don't, think of disorganized attachment, we're offline in our brain. We keep giving to people all the time. Like, we have no boundaries to cut off and say, well, no, they're an adult. Now they need to deal with that themselves. Okay? And we've got to teach ourselves that we can do this, and we've got to teach ourselves that if somebody else is an adult, then they need to take care of their own life. I am not responsible for another adult. Do you know what? When I first learnt that, I really had to take time to wrap my brain around it. It was like, oh my goodness. Because think about it, when we're kids, the adults who abuse us or cause trauma, as children, our brain isn't developed enough to understand that it's their fault, their responsibility. And we don't say just, I'm to blame. We become immersed in the blame and believe that we are bad people. So we don't just say they're bad people and it's them. As a child, our brain isn't even developed enough to understand that. So we come to believe that we are bad people. So in order to, so the codependency and empathy, so think about it this way. I keep giving and doing nice things for people. One, because the trauma as a child taught me to look externally to try and keep me safe. All right. So as an adult, I'm going to keep giving and giving and giving and not recognise that they're an adult who needs to take care of their own stuff until I'm told and informed and learn about it. You know, I sit back and I think somebody who has never experienced trauma, this is an intrinsic part of their life. Whereas we, if we're not told, we don't know. How can we change it? It's not something that even makes sense to us initially, because we actually have to put it into our brain structure, as in sit down and think it through and think through all the dynamics. Now, I want you to think about this too. And I can tell you this, not just personally, but as a coach, that people will say to me when we talk about putting boundaries in place, the first thing they'll say is, I can't do that. I would have been, and I can guarantee back in the day, that would have been my response, is how the heck am I going to do that? Say no to somebody. Like, you know, imagine all of the neurology and biology that triggers in us, because we were never allowed to say no as kids. The abuse happened without our, certainly without us being asked, could they do things or treat us in that manner. So how am I going to begin to say no to adults? And for us, the only way to do it and get off the codependent cycle is to say no and stand up and be strong. As I explained to one of my clients recently, you watch, when you begin to say no, somebody else steps into the void that you leave, because you won't do that and you won't participate in somebody's bad behaviour anymore. So I want you to think about that. And when we're like that too, another thing about that is when we're like that, just remember, when we're like that with the codependency and always helping other people, it stops us from examining the internal system that we've put together. It stops us from feeling how we feel, okay? And we've got to get back to recognising how we've organised our internal system, okay? And yes, it is hard. It's hard, one, because we didn't have the information, but two, we weren't ever told how. We weren't ever allowed to say no, but we can do it and we are safe to do it. And it's part of retraining our brain that we learn that we're safe to do it, okay? Just ask my kids. Christine says she's been so traumatised that she couldn't even understand boundaries for a number of years. Now I get it, and I have to remember to walk away from stuff that's not my business. That's a really good way of putting it. This is none of my business. What they have to do and what they have to sort out is none of my business. And you know what, Christine? That's so often what I say to me in my brain, my mind, is this is none of my business. I can't do anything here. They have to sort it out themselves. They have to sort out their own order, really. Okay, and this is actually my favourite one, because when I read this, I so resonated. So, extremely sensitive to criticism and implied humiliation. Oh my goodness, I couldn't tell you, they were so sensitive to all of this. And so sensitive that I've come to understand in later years that I spent a lot of time criticising myself. Not intentionally, but underneath in the internal system. I did this a lot to try and, in the belief that if I criticised myself, I'd stop any, outer criticism. Okay, it's part of our perfectionist strategy in life. If I stay perfect, then I'm not going to be abused. Okay, I won't experience trauma. But it's not the truth. Okay, we have to first stop bullying ourselves in order that we won't tolerate it from anybody else. Okay, now let me just grab the questions. So whatever you've written down that's resonated with you for that, I want you, and I put the questions in the same order for you as well. So the questions align with each line of, and I'll put these up down below. So sorry, the questions align with each line of information. So the first question for internal self-reflection is, where can I recognise my hyper-vigilance or hyper-vigilance and see where it's exhausting me? So accept, even though you can't sense it at times, accept that you're in hypo or hyper-vigilance, accept that it's exhausting you. Now what you need to do is sit down and go, where is it exhausting me internally? So where is being online and attuned to what everybody else needs exhausting me internally? We can't change the external until we recognise what's happening internally, okay? When I recognise it at a heart level, and when our heart changes, we're able to change a lot of things in our world. Okay, number 2, can I identify any of my irrational behaviours or emotions? And can I just say, as somebody who's experienced a lot of irrational emotions over the years, we don't know they're irrational because to us they're normal. So how do we identify something that we think is normal but it's actually irrational? Sometimes the look on other people's faces is like, what's she on about? What's she doing? I've had to do a lot of this. I promise I've had to do a lot of this. I've had to do a lot of self-reflection and go back and think about it and go, what did I say or do that just didn't make sense? Okay? And you know what? If you have a close community around you who you feel very safe with, you can let them in on that. Sometimes things that you do are irrational and you'd like them to speak with you about it, to sit down and have a conversation. Because I tell you what, if they don't help you, it's, just come and talk to me in group. We'll sort it out. And look, we do reach a place, as you can tell, where we can laugh about some of the irrational things we've done. But if you've experienced sexual abuse as a child, some of the irrational behaviours, we probably should have a chat about some of the things that can happen that are actually detrimental to us as adults as well. I really don't have time to go into all of that now, but we will do unsafe behaviour. Okay? All right, number 3. Which behaviours can I adjust in order to feel worthy, deserving and caring? And your homework can be, you can look up what each of these words mean and begin to become aware of how you can either feel more worthy, to be treated well, cared for, looked after, taken care of, not in a codependent way, but certainly in an adult-to-adult way, and work out what areas of life you do have a lot of worth. I'll be the first to tell you, you are worthy, you are loved, you are cared for, and it matters where we go to from here each day in order that you can feel worthy and valued and safe and loved. Alright? But first start with your internal system. This is a big one. What am I going to change to begin to learn to trust? Sometimes learning to trust, we have to learn to trust ourselves first. We have to learn to trust our decision making. So if you have to put off making a decision in order that you can go and research all the information you need, then do it. But first of all, what am I going to change to begin to learn to trust? Okay. Next one, am I able to begin feeling comfortable around others when they express their emotions? So this lines up with the empathy. So obviously if someone's really cranky, we find it really, really hard to be around them, really hard. But we can begin to communicate. Actually, I did a video on communication and how to communicate, but I'll redo another one with further information for us with complex PTSD. But if that's happening in your life at the moment, you need to sit down, breathe, and ask yourself the question. Okay, adjusting my boundaries to accept productive feedback, what do I need to understand? I'll leave you with that one. Because there are so many facets of what we need to understand in order to be able to accept feedback. And one of the criteria, one of the crucial things, is that we understand the difference between positive feedback and negative feedback. So do a bit of research around both so that you know that you don't take feedback from every man and his dog who just wants to dump on you. Brené Brown has a really brilliant saying around this type of thing, and she had to learn this as she became more well known because, people had offered their 2 cents worth all over the place. And she said she learnt not to take on board anyone's opinion or anyone's 2 cents worth, okay, if they weren't in the field fighting the same good fight. So if somebody's not in the same good fight as you, as in learning about their internal system, understanding what's going on, or somebody who's got a secure attachment because they get it, then you don't want to take on board what they've got to say. Okay? So it comes back to, yeah, they're allowed to have their 2 cents worth, but I just need to walk on and work out what's happening for me. Okay, it's a really healthy thing for us to learn to do initially in this process. Okay? Now, grab a journal, book, grab a diary. Oh, look, I have to share this with you. See this one? $4 from Kmart for those of us in Australia. And trust me, I would have just got an ordinary plain one, but why when you can get the sparkle stuff and let's sparkle away, okay? Just grab something. And look, I do, with my journals, I actually have A4 journals. These are for my daily, to-do or to-do lists, and I grab hardcover stuff so that I can pick it up and go anywhere I need to sit and journal, okay? So sometimes that's just, go jump in the car, go down to the water and sit and journal. It helps. It really does help. Yeah, it is, Christine. It's pink and sparkly. Okay, beautiful people. Thank you for joining in. I will put up all the infographics down below. Remember, we're the tortoises and we win the race every single time. Slow and steady, and one step every day makes a different year next year. Okay? Blessings and dreams, and I am going to see the doctor today to get some antibiotics, so I will be on time tomorrow. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate every single one of you. Have a gorgeous day or a wonderful night. Bye for now.